What is the difference between freehold and leasehold?
The thing is, it just takes so much time.
Make it the current seller's issue to solve rather than your issue to solve. A lease that is unmortgageable unless there's a deed of variation and the lease is varied. Allow for that in your negotiation and your timescales and that kind of thing. Eyes wide open, all this stuff you should know before you make an offer. What's the longest you've had for a management pack to come back?
If it's under 100 years, you're probably going to need to look at extending it, which can cost.
But in 30 years' time, your ground rent could be £5,000 a year.
And make sure you know how much it's going to cost as well, because it does vary.
So let's quickly talk about leasehold, freehold, because one of the most common questions that people ask us as agents, but also they're Googling and YouTubing, what is the difference between freehold and leasehold?
So freehold typically is a house because you own everything, so the actual property along with the land underneath. Leasehold, again, typically the flat because you own not the building, but the flat, but not the land that it's actually built on. So you need to be careful when you're looking at leasehold properties because there are the additional costs. So lease length, really important because lenders are getting probably even more tight. Something under 100, they will lend on it. There's, you get specialist lenders and all the rest of it. Under 80 years, that's when it becomes much more problematic. But consider the lease length because if it's under 100 years, you're probably going to need to look at extending it, which can cost, it varies, doesn't it? But
the lower it gets, the more expensive it gets. But you've also got to consider how long you're planning on staying in that property as to whether or not it's going to be a problem.
How long it will be, Lee?
If you've got a 105-year lease and it's like a stepping stone and you've got 2 years in it and you need to buy a house, probably not a massive issue.
No.
If it's 105 years, you think it'll be 10 years, big issue. Make it the current seller's issue to solve rather than your issue to solve once you bought it.
And make sure you know how much it's going to cost as well because it does vary. So alongside the lease length, you've also got ground rent. So as I said, you don't own the land. So you rent, there's the ground rent. Again, that varies. Got to be careful because some of them are like doubling. What is it? Yeah. And again, lenders don't like it.
Yeah.
So that makes, again, bit of a legal headache. Well, not massively, but a hurdle that you need to overcome.
I mean, it can add 6 to 8 weeks plus cost to the transaction because more recent new builds, they've had a lease that is unmortgageable unless there's a deed of variation and the lease is varied. And what that is, we'll touch on it quickly, but it basically says, in the lease it says, so ground rent is paid to the person that owns the land the building sits on. It's like rent, ground rent. And in the lease, that doubles every 10 years. But what happens is, say it's £300 now, then it's £600, then it's £1,200, then it's £2,400. So with some of these leases, in 30 years' time, say the lease is 125 years, but in 30 years' time, your ground rent could be £5,000 a year. Lenders ain't touching them.
I've got one going through at the moment, and also the thing is it just takes so much time. So we, again, even getting a deed of variation agreed, so the lender didn't like the original suggestion, so we had to and fro, and you've got to remember you're dealing with then the management company. It's a third party, so it's even slower than just the solicitors talking. Yeah. But then you've got to get everyone to sign it. So it's still at the moment being signed. But again, third party trying to chase them. It just costs, it takes a lot of time and it costs money.
So power tip right there is if you're buying the leasehold, get a copy of the lease quick time.
Yeah. Because
you're going to have your solicitor on side. I would say send the lease to the solicitor from the get-go.
Yeah.
And just say, can you quickly review this? Charge me £200. Before I go and spend money on surveys, we do searches, and it's 8 weeks down the line that we discover it's got a non-mortgageable lease. Let's nip it in the bud now. One of your questions to the estate agent and seller could be, are you happy to do a deed of variation?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, you move on.
Yeah, because again, it's not one of those questions that it's like, don't buy a leasehold and don't buy one with the ground rent that's like that, because it can be overcome, but just make sure you're not the one paying for.
And if you're renting somewhere and you're planning on being out there in 2 months' time, and then you've got another month to wait for this deed of variation, which it can take that long. Yeah. I've had it. You need to allow for that in your negotiation and your timescales and that kind of thing.
But then another cost, so on top of the ground rent, is again management fees as well. So again, that will vary. Now that's typically just like the electricity, if the block's got a lift, that sort of thing. But it can vary from, I've got some at the moment where they're £6,000 a year. Again, lenders will take that into consideration. So just because a lender said they'll borrow you X, they'll take that into consideration. All of a sudden, your affordability's dropped.
Yeah, of course, because if you're getting a mortgage on a leasehold and it's an added cost that comes out of the income that you earn to be able to pay the mortgage. which is awesome. So eyes wide open, all this stuff you should know before you make an offer.
Yeah.
Is the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah.
What happens a lot of the time though, now we're very good in being public and transparent from the get-go. A lot of this stuff don't come out for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks down the line.
Yeah. And
then it falls through. So like, I didn't realise it was that much maintenance, or sometimes it's even scheduled to go up next year, isn't it? So you've got your kind of budget. These leasehold blocks have a budget for the year, and it might be that this year we've run at a deficit. So maintenance this year was $2,000, but next year, once you've bought the place, it's going to be $4,000. So the seller says, well, I pay $2,000 a year currently, thinking nothing of it.
Yeah.
You get the leasehold management pack, and it says in our budget for next year, each flat's going to pay £4,000.
Yeah.
So that's doubled.
So it's asking for a breakdown of what it is, but also making sure that they do actually apply for that management pack early doors as well. So then you get that information as quickly as possible.
What's the longest you've had for a management pack to come back?
Gosh, I don't know off the top of my head.
I had one that was 6 weeks.
I was going to say a month.
Yeah. A month is probably quite
average,
yeah. Week or two is doing well. 6 weeks, I've had one, and that was painful.
And you've got to remember, Freehold can have everything done in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So when, again, something to remember, know if you're buying freehold or leasehold, because the length from offer accepted to exchange is going to be completely different.
You teed me up lovely there, Jules.